Ladies and gentlemen, in this video we're gonna be talking whether or not healing is gonna be worth it in Mythic Plus Season 2 of The War Within. I really wanted this video to be a positive one, but I don't think all the ingredients for that are there, so I would at least try to keep it neutral, and I'll probably fail pretty badly, but let's see where this goes. I will start by saying that healing is probably going to feel more or less exactly the same as it felt in Season 1, so take it as you will. And that by itself, it's a little bit sad because the other roles seem to have gotten some love. Specific class changes aside, the DPS seems to have gotten their demands for interrupts and CC in each of the packs significantly reduced, which essentially is making their life a little bit easier. And at the same time, the tanks got a lot of their tank busters either nerfed or removed or reduced, and now they're getting 20% increased damage across the board. Now, not only their lives are gonna be a little bit easier, but they'll also be doing significant contribution, probably even out DPSing some DPS slots if they're not a good players. And as they were in a pretty bad place during Season 1, it seems that now they're rising up through the ranks and getting a better season. We can easily say that if tanking felt miserable during Season 1, it's definitely going to feel so much better in Season 2, and we cannot say the same about healers. There are some class changes, of course, which is the same across the board for all the roles, but there's nothing major that is going to change about how the healing is going to feel. The damage profile is still spiky as hell, so that's not changing. And on top of that, there are no changes about the amount of defensives that the other classes have, so now when you go into a fight, it's gonna be tuned for people pressing their defensives, which means that you should not be able to roll heal it in case they don't, so the only thing that can happen in those scenarios is either they press their defensives and it doesn't matter if you're there, or they don't, you wipe, and yeah, it's your fault. So yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is exactly how Season 1 felt, and unfortunately, there's even more. Looking at the dungeons for Season 2 on the PTR, there are a couple of things that made a huge impression to me. First, it seems that Blizzard is trying to compensate for the lack of enough interrupts and CCs by adding a whole bunch of mechanics, most of which include some kind of dodging. There's plenty of swirlies that you need to dodge, frontals that you need to move out from, hammers spinning around, orbs or soul blades that you need to move out from, mobs charging across the battlefield, or just some kind of waves that are crawling towards you and you need to dodge, spinning beams, lasers, and machine guns. And yeah, you get it, the list goes on and on and on. And yes, fine, Blizzard wants to make it challenging, but I think they've went a little bit way too far on this. In the past, it would feel like you're healing, there's something to dodge, so you dodge it, and then you continue healing. Now it feels like you're dodging, you try to heal a little bit, but then you keep dodging and dodging more. And when these things overlap with heavy AoE damage, which happens basically all the time, it starts to feel very hard to manage those situations, sometimes even unfair. And yes, you can call me a crybaby, you'd be right, but I personally felt in so many situations that I'm simply playing a different game and I'm not healing, I'm just there to be dodging stuff. Which is basically not what I signed up at the first place. And to continue with the tiers, the dispels and the debuffs and the bleeds that are present this season also seems to be obnoxious. There's way too many situations where 2, sometimes even 3 people are going to get a dot or a debuff or a bleed, and maybe you're lucky and your class profile allows you to dispel one of them, but then you remain highly dependent on having the right comp and the right classes that can potentially dispel the other one, or if they don't, maybe they press a defensive. But there were just so many mechanics where I would end up being stuck spam healing not 1 but sometimes even 2 people, simply because our comp didn't have the tools to deal with it. And oh my god, when the dispel affix was there, I wanted to punch puppies and throw kittens out of my window, as it felt so unfair to play against when you had the wrong comp or there were overlaps with other dispels that you needed to perform. So yeah, call me a pessimist, call me a bad player, but I'm definitely not looking forward into dealing with this during Season 2. as a healer. There's two more things to mention here at the end. The first one is tuning, and yes, everything was tuned incredibly bad into the beginning of the PTR, which I guess is something to expect. It is testing, they were trying out some numbers, and they definitely did some adjustments later on. I do expect tuning to be into a relatively good place on release, but I have to be pessimist on this one as well. Many pugs wouldn't even make it past the middle of the dungeon in the first iterations of the PTR because of the tuning, and that actually did not change a lot towards the end. A lot of people get discouraged by the difficulty quite early, they leave, so there's simply not enough data collected for the later parts of the dungeons. So I wouldn't be surprised if the last bosses on release are extremely overtuned, because the only people who manage to get there and see them are basically sweats, who definitely perform much better than your friendly neighborhood overage pug that could eventually get there. And if the tuning is rigged towards those players, good luck if you're not one of them. Not to mention that for the longest time, MOTHERLODE and Priory of the Sacred Flame were not testable on the PTR because they would not pop up in the LFG2. And yes, there were workarounds for that, but people would simply not test them as much as the other dungeons. So the data there is definitely scarce and rigged towards sweats, which found the workarounds. Not to mention that the Priory bug is still there right now on the PTR, so it's not easy to go in and test it even if you wanted to. That simply adds more to my pessimism that they'll be able to pull out the correct numbers, and everything is going to be fine on release, which means that they'll have to do a lot of fixes, a lot of tuning, a lot of patching after the release is there, and that is simply going to turn off a lot of people who are going to quit much earlier and are not going to wait for 1 or 2 weeks or months until everything is in a playable state. That means that there will be simply less people in the LFG2, and that brings me to the last point that I would like to bring up. One of the most unpleasant experiences that I had during Season 1 was not healing itself, but just simply sitting there in the LFG2 and waiting for a group to form or get an invite to one. Which is what happens if you're pugging all of your keys, and yes, you can say find a team, that's the solution, but let's face it, the reality is that people are pugging most of their keys. Even if you have a team, you're most certainly pugging on some of your ults. That experience was an all-time low for me during Season 1, and it actually felt even worse on the PTR, which might be relevant or not. It might be slightly easier to find tanks during Season 2, but I still think that it's going to be extremely difficult season if you're pugging, be it because of mechanics, tuning, or just spending a lot of time and sitting in the LFG2. So this is what I'm preparing for. I really hope that I'm wrong, but only time will tell. Let me know what are your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Now get out of here.